To everyone who's joined, good afternoon, good morning, good evening. I know we have people joining from all around the world. Just to start with our title, there are two P's in the title, pitfalls and potential, but actually we're going to introduce a third P and start with that. So our presentation will be in three parts. We'll look at what is being promised to qualitative researchers in terms of generative AI in particular, and its use in qualitative data analysis. We'll move on to the pitfalls and perils, and then we'll end with what we see the potential as being in the current moment. So, Duc, if you move on. Yeah, so as I said, we'll start with the promises, and this is what got us interested in this whole topic about, let me think, 2 years ago now, 3 years ago. So I'm losing track of how long ago it was, but very early on in all of the excitement around generative AI, you started seeing promotional material such as the one on the screen from atlas.ti. And atlas.ti, most of you know, and many of you may have used, and they were promising, thanks to their alliance with OpenAI, that you could now gain qualitative insights in minutes instead of weeks. So they were the front runners out of the gate pretty fast. But they were soon joined by a whole host of others. And in fact, as well as that, a lot of promises as to there being a revolution and that qualitative data analysis will never be the same again. So on the screen, you can see some of the players, but we'll move now to a bit of an analysis of the current state of play. So now the point is that on the previous slide, there were a lot of promises, and typically they're being made by people who have something they want to sell to you. So this is a space that is rapidly being commercialized. And you all know that qualitative data analysis software has been available for a long time. You may not know that the first packages were introduced in the late 80s, early 1990s. So what is now in vivo, for example, goes back to those days, to the 1980s. You may also not realize that forms of AI have been used, or at least have been available to qualitative researchers to use for a considerable period of time. So the very first software package that introduced machine learning into qualitative data analysis was released in 2002. So if we're talking about AI generally, this is actually nothing new. AI and machine learning have been there in these packages for a very long time. So we could actually sort of stop the webinar here, really, in some senses, because AI has been around. It hasn't really changed things much for qualitative research. And we didn't get very excited by it. For reasons that I guess will become clear. So to cut a long story short, automated coding has actually been integrated into these mainstream packages like NVivo for 20 years or so. So that form of AI has been around. It's alive and well. You may know of it in the form of, for example, topic modeling. So that's, you can see from the slide off there to one side, and it's off to one side because really, when we're talking about AI and the potential of AI, currently people are actually referring to generative AI. Okay, and we will keep coming back to this because it's incredibly important that we keep this distinction in mind. There's AI and there's AI, and really all of the hype is around generative AI. And we know there's a lot of hype everywhere when it comes to this particular form of AI, and qualitative research is no exception to this. There's a lot of hype around generative AI. So when you see our slide here, we're looking in the main part of the slide at all of the players offering generative AI tools, not just AI tools, for qualitative data analysis. And this is specifically for qualitative data analysis. We're not talking about literature reviews. We're not talking about ideation tools, etc., etc. So we're not talking about the entire workflow, i.e. the entire research process. We're just talking about the suggestions that it be used to speed up our data analysis. So what you can see here is pretty much the current state of play. We don't know how it's all going to end up, but there are a lot of commercial players out there. And you can also see that there are some familiar names, such as Atlas and Vivo. So they've hurriedly brought out new versions of their software with AI-assisted tools. But as well as that, like with any new technology, there are new players, new entrants into the space. So there are some born AI, if you like, born GenAI players, such as Q Insights or Coloop. Again, some of you may have heard of them. There are some enterprising individuals who've created customized GPTs, which you can download. And then, of course, what a lot of people are doing is just using the generic LLMs, such as ChatGPT or Gemini, and playing around with that to see whether they will be sufficient as an analytical tool for qualitative data. So that's pretty much where we're at in terms of who's doing what. Now, as well as the commercial players, of course, there's also a lot of excitement among researchers. And we've got here excerpts from a paper that's coming out in Organizational Research Methods. One of the reasons why I got interested in this topic is not just because I am a qualitative researcher, so I was thinking, oh my goodness, what does GenAI mean for me? And it seems that I'm not the only one thinking about this because there are a lot of people who joined the webinar. But also I am involved with Organizational Research Methods. I'm an associate editor there. So I was thinking, okay, I really need to work out what's going on here. So this is a paper that I did not handle, we'll say that, that is coming out soon in the journal. But it actually gives us a sense of some of the reasons for the excitement around GenAI, but also some of the concerns that if you're a qualitative researcher will immediately jump out at you. So like with the atlas.ti tagline, you can now do analysis in minutes, not hours or weeks. You can see here that the potential is seen as lying in the efficiency gains that you will get. And without seemingly any sacrifice of quality, that you can get both. You can have your cake and eat it too. You can get all of the rich contextual insights along with the efficiency. However, once you start digging a bit deeper, actually, when you look at this paper, even though the title is qualitative data, what they mean is, yes, textual data. So what they're doing is analyzing text, but they're not analysing it qualitatively. So the paper is mainly based on topic modelling and sentiment analysis. So it's not actually what we would, as qualitative researchers, term qualitative data analysis. And we're noticing this as a bit of a trend. So what is happening is there's even a bit of a confusion now between what is textual analysis, analysed quantitatively, and qualitative data analysis. And so people are not even necessarily referring to the same thing. We have also noticed that a lot of the early commentators and pioneers, if you like, when it comes to qualitative data analysis, were not actually qualitative researchers. They were computer scientists who were looking at the potential of GenAI to label data, to annotate data, or they were quantitative researchers like this research team who are doing quantitative analysis of qualitative data. Next slide. Now, along with the commercial players and some of these early experimenters with LLMs, you get a lot of excitement among journal editors as well. So probably a lot of you attending the webinar today will have read editorials and commentaries. Now, one of the issues we have with these commentaries is they're thought pieces without a lot of evidence behind it. So it's really examining what might be possible, what they think might be possible, without any hard testing of this potential. And so we were thinking, okay, well, can GenAI do all of this? Can GenAI be a data analyst? Can it be a co-author? What sort of opportunity is it? And we also could see from this, and you get a bit of a flavour of this from these quotes, that there's this slide that happens between AI and GenAI. And one of the points that we want to make very early on, and Duc will take over in a minute and do a deeper dive, we want to alert people to the fact that all AI is not equal, and very often people attribute to GenAI capabilities it simply does not have. And we're talking about actually a range of technologies. And when you look at commentaries and editorials, they're making claims about what GenAI can do, which actually don't stand up to scrutiny. And one of the reasons for this is the sheer confusion everyone has over what actually is AI. So you can see I've already started talking about some of the pitfalls and perils. So we'll go into this in more detail and examine what this also means for qualitative data analysis.
Now, do we want to take any questions here, Catherine, or should we continue on?
Yeah, does anyone have any clarification questions at this point? Yes?
Aaron, go ahead.
Just briefly, I think I know what you might mean when you were talking about downloading specialized models, but could you just elaborate on what that means? Because everything else, platforms and the general use of ChatGPT made sense, but I just I wonder if you could expand on that specialized model downloading aspect of
in terms of custom GPTs, you mean?
Yes, ma'am. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's more so on the OpenAI's platform. So you can actually go in and have a look at all of different custom GPTs. So think of it very much like an application store that you have on your phone. This is the one that OpenAI has for different developers, individuals to create different custom chatbots.
Got it. So still on their platform, but it's a kind of local app on their platform.
Yes, that's right.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah. So the point there is anyone can upload a custom GPT.
Thank you.
Yep. Amber?
Yeah, I just want to clarify. You talked about, of course, Atlas AI and Vivo.
Yep.
So I'm just getting, I understand that these were the incumbents. Are you saying that they are also using it for analysis purposes, or?
Yeah.
I'm a bit, I want that clarification, so I wasn't sure.
Yeah. So basically, you can still get NVivo with all of the different functions that it always has had. So you still do manual coding, but they also have a feature which they call AI Assist. So it's an additional function that the latest release is now offering. So we will actually go in and say a little bit more about what it does offer. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for clarification.
Yeah, I think it's also worthwhile to point out that that additional feature, it comes at a cost. It's a subscription.
That's true. You have to pay more for it.
You have to pay more for it. Yep.
Yeah. Then it becomes tricky, right? All of a sudden.
Well, the question is, do you want to pay the extra cost or not?
Yeah, and you're right. Sorry. And also when you said about customized GPTs, there are so many.
There are.
If you end up paying for, and I have used some, but I do not know which ones are more appropriate. So it's just hit and trial.
Exactly. And there's no quality control. So so you as you say, as the individual, you have to do it. Amin?
Hello, everyone. Hello, Catherine. Thank you very much for your presentation. I'm just wondering, do you think we are enough educated to use this kind of...
That's a really
Thank
good
you.
question. Yeah, it is a very good question. And it is something that I think we're going to just talk about now. And I really do value the question you asked, because we've all been hit with this issue out of the blue. Suddenly, we've had to very fast develop some AI literacy. So it's a huge challenge for everyone in society and for qualitative researchers as well. So it's an incredibly relevant question. And of course, why should we know anything about it? This was just something that for most people just came out of the blue. And so it's been a huge learning curve for everyone.
With a lot of promises.
Thank you very much.
Yes, that's right. So there's also a lot of hype, a lot of claims, and it's a case of buyer beware, I'm afraid. Kerry?
Thank you very much. Maybe as Duc, he said that I'm feeling that when we talk with people, we're talking with machine. And when we talk with machine, maybe we need to learn as well to find out the right prompts, to try to remove hallucination and things like that. And even if we don't trust this kind of technology, it has been how say that it has been learned with our mindset actually about our question, our response, and things like that. So yes, it is a tricky thing. So thank you very much, both of you. Thank you.
Kerry?
You mentioned briefly tools for literature review, and specifically, I was curious about tools like Elicit.com and Research Rabbit and some of those others, and their ability to search through massive databases and come up with a synthesis for you.
Yeah, so that's beyond the scope of our presentation today.
Yeah, but hopefully I can speak to, when I speak about the technology, I'll make it quite clear about how it actually doesn't process hundreds of thousands of papers or so on and so forth. But yeah, we'll speak about that in the next part.
Yeah, so any clarification questions on what so far? been discussed? Yeah, I think we might move on.
Yes, let's move on. Okay. So to consider the perils of generative AI, we should really start with what is the technology. Now, it's worthwhile to point out that Catherine and I, we aren't experts in AI. So what we are presenting here is very much based on our own readings and discussions with computer scientists. And of course, by now there are a range of accessible books out there for a general audience. Now, as Catherine mentioned, generative artificial intelligence, it is often conflated with a range of other AI technologies. And this has really led to a lot of misunderstandings about what the technology can and what the technology cannot do. So this is very much understandable because there really isn't a consensus out there on what is AI. So for the purpose of this presentation, we will be using Emily Bender's and Alex Hanna's definition. That is, AI is a marketing term. It is deployed when people building or selling a particular set of technologies will profit from getting others to believe that their technology is similar to humans, able to do things that in fact require human judgment, perception, or creativity. Very much like as we will argue in qualitative data analysis. So generative AI tools like ChatGPT and Gemini, they are actually based on a very specific class of predictive next token statistical model of language. Said shortly, this is what everyone's familiar with. It's a large language model. So what are they? Well, essentially, it's an algorithm that has been trained on vast data sets, usually scraped from the internet. And then as a byproduct of this training, these models can generate synthetic content that very much resembles human-like creativity. Now, it's really important to point out that the outputs should not be equated with human-like reasoning or intelligence. Instead, the outputs should be understood as the product of a sophisticated statistical pattern matching exercise that reproduces and recombines patterns that it has encoded during training. So one way to think about this is that these models, they actually don't store any information. All of that information is actually encoded. It's a numerical number. And so the model itself is only looking at patterns and relationships right across. So there's no phrases, there's no word strings, there's actually no knowledge in there whatsoever. So as a result of this, the outputs aren't actually producing any results from any inputs that you have. Anything that is generated by these models should be seen as a sample that's drawn from a distribution based on its training data, but also conditioned on your input prompt or your uploaded documents. So what's the bottom line? What does this all mean? Well, it means that these statistical models of language do not understand. They cannot interpret nor can they analyze text, and they cannot extract text nor identify themes and so on and so forth. It's because these models are just statistical pattern matching models. Okay, so what are some of the issues with these models? Well, when we start to separate out the marketing claims that have been bombarding us in the last 3 years from the actual research, we know that there is actually quite a long list of issues with these statistical models. But we're only going to speak to a few here. The first is that there is insufficient explainability. That's to say that there's no audit trail. We actually don't know, and we can't explain why did a particular model produce a particular output at any particular given point in time. And so because of that, it's very much considered a black box. The next point is that there are inherent biases with these models. Now, beyond the biases that are embedded within its training data, which is usually scraped from the internet, the biases come in all throughout the model's development and deployment. So the first one comes when data is curated, it has to be labeled. And with that, you actually need a whole army of data annotators. They're usually from very low socioeconomic countries, Venezuela or Kenya, and they're the ones who are labeling the data for training. Now, beyond that, there are also developers and evaluators biases. This is where they start to put in other commands to control and steer the behaviors of the model. So whatever output you're seeing is being conditioned by all of these different layers. And of course, the developers, they have the final say on what they consider to be socially desirable or socially acceptable outputs. In addition to all of this, because it is a statistical model of language, any outputs that we have, it will not be able to achieve reliability, or will it be able to achieve reproducibility. Now, these features here, they are not a bug. They are actually a feature of the statistical model. And so because there's all of these issues, what we've seen in the last couple of years is a lot of technological developments in order to overcome them. The first one being is RAGs architecture, so retrieval augmented generation. This is supposed to ground the model into a particular set of information. So for example, you upload it in empirical documents. The problem here is, as I've already highlighted, this is a statistical model. It doesn't encode that your data actually has this word string. It's looking at the relationships between them. And this is why hallucinations and errors are always there, even when you have RAG architectures. Now, the next development that the industry has been talking about and that has been highly hyped are agents. Well, fundamentally, what are agents? Agents is just another large language model. And as such, it is a statistical model. So that's not working. The current discussion now that we're seeing is the development of world models. What that actually looks like, whose world, we don't know. But that's where it's at. But none of these technological innovations are able to fix the problems. So because it is a statistical model of language, the models themselves are not designed to establish any facts. An output does not need to be correct. It must appear correct. So just take a moment to reflect on that. We have a statistical pattern matching machine that is generating synthetic text out there, and it doesn't have any concern towards the truth. It doesn't have access to any knowledge. All it knows are the statistical relationships between what it has encoded. Now, because of that, and because of the underlying technology, we know OpenAI, when they first released their ChatGPT 4, they made a caution. They said great care should be taken when using language model outputs and avoid high stakes uses altogether. Now, we would argue that high stakes include qualitative research, where you are dealing with lived participants' experiences. Now, that quote there from OpenAI, that was in 2023. And so some would argue that there has been a lot of technological advances since. The field is moving very rapidly, so on and so forth. Well, this is a very timely quote that we have from Google CEO Sundar Pichai, and this was just last week. He cautioned that people should not blindly trust AI, and it is prone to some errors. Now, we know why these errors are there, because it's an inherent feature of the statistical model. Okay, but nonetheless, despite all of that, there is a big push still to place a statistical model of language between you, the researcher, and your empirical data. Now, early on, when this technology first came out, discussions and all of the hype was very much around automation. And so it was about auto coding, identifying themes, so on and so forth. And this is where we see a lot of discussion around, it's all about the importance of the prompt. And this is where I'm sure many of you would have come across prompts such as, you got to tell the large language model, you got to tell ChatGPT that it is a qualitative data analysis expert, it needs to do this, so on and so forth. Now, in the 3 years since, we've come a long way. There's been quite a fair bit of experimentations across, whether it's from entrepreneurs or researchers in between. And there is an emerging consensus that automation simply just doesn't work. Why? Because the statistical model of language actually can't do that. It can't code, it's not doing it consistently, so on and so forth. And now the discussion has shifted towards augmentation instead, around chatting with your data, having a conversation and entering into a dialogue with that. Now, I would point out that if in doing that, you are not actually looking at your data, because you have this predictive statistical model between you and your empirical data. And this equally applies for both applications, whether you're using a standalone Copilot or Gemini, or a qualitative data analysis software that has built on this technology. The only thing that you can do is prompt it. So whereas when you're using an individual model, you get to interact with it directly. When you're using someone else's model that builds on top of it, it's their prompts that you're going to be reacting to. Right, and because the model doesn't store any knowledge base, doesn't have any of those uploaded documents, it's only looking at the statistical relationships between them. Anything that comes out, it's a synthetic output. These aren't results. These are just a sample based on a distribution, conditioned on your input, conditioned on the uploaded data, and its training data. Okay, so the pitfalls. Well, now, when we do get these synthetic outputs, it's generated very quickly, and we often assume it to be neutral and objective owing to its technological origins. Now, because the generated content can resemble convincing scholarly work, including common forms of qualitative data analysis templates, it's often also assumed to be very authoritative. Now, we would argue that this is the oracle effect. It's where we start to accord large language models with intelligence that is comparable with, if not exceeding, humans. Now, for some of us, despite the fact that we know that this is a language model, a statistical model, just the very nature of interactions with it, we tend to anthropomorphize the chatbot. And this is because we assume that there is a communicative intent behind the textual outputs. Now, as a species, we've never encountered a technology that's been able to reproduce language. So whenever we do encounter any language, we assume that there is an intention behind that, a motivation behind that. So for instance, why is this rock art here? Why does it have a lizard? We assume that there's a motivation and intention behind that. Now, because of the way in which how the language models are designed, which is namely to please you, to engage in interaction, we do anthropomorphize it because it gives us outputs such as, wow, that's a very astute observation. What a sharp and insightful question. And as we start to interact with these models in this way, we start to form the view that they can be a very capable research assistant, a colleague, even a friend. And now we have these in quotations because these are what people who are experimenting with them, researchers who are experimenting with them, that's what they are reporting. So what happens throughout all of this chatting or trying to identify codes and so on is that each interaction produces an ever-expanding body of synthetic content that needs to be validated. This means that any of the supposed efficiency gains, the promises that Catherine spoke about, that's all an illusion. Same with the argument about scalability. That's impossible given the sheer number of synthetic outputs. So if you're chatting with one interview transcripts that might be 4 or 5 pages long, if you think about that multiplied across all of your interview transcripts and then all of the generated content on top of that, that may or may not be related to your data, so you can see how the wheels quickly fall apart with both automation and augmentation. Okay, now we're going to run through some worked examples of what this looks like, and I'll hand it over to Catherine.
Thanks, Duc. So yeah, the technological aspects of this can get a bit confusing. So we'll now go to some actual examples of what this all means in practice when you're trying to engage with these tools. So we'll start with NVivo. And this is a package that a lot of you have access to or may have access to thanks to your institution. Often you can get it via institutional licenses. And we've already been discussing it in the Q&A. So this is the add-on. So you can still do whatever you used to do with NVivo, and now they're offering this AI Assist, which was their response to the advent of GenAI. Now, when they say AI Assist, really, when you have a look at what they're offering is they will summarize the text for you. This AI Assist tool will summarize your text, and they will provide child code, not parent code, but child code suggestions. So when you think about all of the things that you do as a qualitative data analyst, well, probably summarizing text doesn't spring to mind as being the main priority and the main way you go about analyzing your data. You're not that interested in summaries. Secondly, you can see that it's pretty limited in terms of the sort of coding that it will do. It will provide some suggestions here and there, but even the people who are involved in NVivo will tell you that these are pretty descriptive codes. So we have here on the slide a trainer for NVivo, and this was a YouTube video on the Lumivero website, in other words, the owner of NVivo. And he cautions everyone about the use of this AI-assisted tool, saying that what you're going to get at best is very, very descriptive codes, and it's not interpretive. It's not putting in all of the other layers that we have to do when we do data analysis. So buyer beware, basically. Yeah, next slide. So if you have a look at the other big names in qualitative data analysis software, they're doing pretty much the same thing. So if you go to MaxQDA, they have, again, caveat emptor, that this is just assistance. It's not a source of truth. And Duc has explained why. You cannot be confident that what you get as an output is actually an accurate reproduction of your data. And that goes down to the nature of what an LLM is. Now, they have some examples here, and you can see that from their code examples that, again, it's highly descriptive. So any sort of coding outputs that you get will be pretty generic and pretty descriptive. And this is based on the advertising that they do as well. And you'll be able to see this in all of the material that they offer. And we've got a slide from atlas.ti as well, and the same thing. So they too give you a warning that AI coding may not produce accurate results. And I've seen some chat go past that, well, we don't worry about reproducibility because we're qualitative researchers. Well, we actually want to make sure that we are analysing our data, and that if we're coding data, it is something that our informants did actually say, but we can't even be confident of that. So you have to go back and check, is what is coming out of the LLM as an output, is this actually your data? Because remember, the LLM is processing it, and what comes out may not actually be the same as what you put into it. So the accuracy of your data may be harmed in the process of using the LLM. That's the important point. So you may not actually be analysing exactly what it is that your interviewee said. Now, that is something that should be of concern to qualitative researchers. So we also had a look at some of these sort of AI native tools, and they offer two types of features. The first one is automated coding. So this is one example. We're not going to say exactly which company it is, but they're pretty similar across all of these offerings. And this, it gives you an example. So we tested across a range of different types of uploadings, so multiple interview transcripts, different data sources, so newspaper articles, etc., etc. And the bottom line was the more data you fed in, the less reliable the output. So our best results were gained from a single interview transcript. So for the purpose of testing, we used an interview transcript that's publicly available. So I'm not doing anything that would violate ethics requirements. This is not confidential data that I'm playing around with and displaying on the screen. But what you get with the automated thematic analysis that these software packages offer you is something like this. So this was an entire transcript. It was an oral history interview. So it's a single individual talking about their life story. So you can see that the first theme is childhood influences, and the entire transcript, which I think from memory was about 25, 30 pages, is summarized in these 4 themes. Now, if you go and redo it, if you press the button, remember it's automated. If you press the button and ask for another thematic analysis, it will give you a similar set of themes, but not necessarily exactly the same, because again, it doesn't produce the same answer every time, as you know from your own interactions with an LLM. And remember, even though these are specific platforms for qualitative data analysis, they're all using the same basic foundational models, and specifically all of them have signed agreements with OpenAI. So this is OpenAI under the hood, so to speak. So if we go on, you can see that this theme is extremely broad. It's not really anything that you couldn't have worked out for yourself by flicking through the transcript. And it's also not tailored to your specific question and your specific interest. Remember, it's automated, so it's just going to give you whatever seem to be the themes that come up. And what we found is that it doesn't even examine the entire text, and you don't know why. So with this particular analysis, it took an awful lot from the early parts of the text, skipped over other parts, and then concentrated on some parts of the text towards the end. And why? We don't know. Again, it's a black box. So we then moved on to what is the second feature of these packages, and that is that you can chat, you can converse with your data. And this is the so-called conversational analysis that some qualitative researchers are talking about. So you can chat with your data, but as Duc pointed out, you're actually not chatting with your data, you're chatting with the LLM. And so what difference does that make? So I asked it a question, and this was something that I was interested in. It is an interview with, if anyone's old enough to remember, I'm old enough to remember, this was the inventor of the Palm Pilot, which was a predecessor to the iPhone. It was a handheld computer. So at the time, this was a big deal. A lot of people had Palm Pilots. And so the question I asked, because I was genuinely interested in the answer, is what was the most difficult aspect of developing the Palm Pilot? Now, the next thing, next slide, Duc. The thing is, though, I knew in advance, because I'd read through the transcript in some detail, I knew that this is something that was in the transcript. And the reason why I say this is that if I asked a question of the chatbot that was not covered in the interview, that's when you'd get a nonsensical reply. Okay, so whenever I asked a question about something outside of the transcript, then I'd get sort of a nonsense response. But in this case, I knew that this was covered in the interview transcript. So what did I get? And so when you actually interrogate this further, Duc, you can go to the next slide. Actually, it's providing, again, another summary. It doesn't actually answer the question. So I asked about challenges. It talks about lessons that were learned, which is not the same thing. And there were challenges that were mentioned in the transcript. That's why I asked the question. They're not reproduced by the chatbot. And really, for me to know this, for me to understand the answer I got, I actually have to go back and reread the transcript and actually go and do the analysis for myself. So bottom line, instead of really getting to know my data, what I'm doing is verifying the chatbot answers, which, as we've been saying, are two different things.
Okay, so where does that leave us? This is what we would argue that a generative AI workflow in qualitative data analysis would look like. It is essentially an infinite loop of chatbot conversation. And that's applied both through you interacting with the model or you using another platform that builds on these particular models. And so why is it an infinite loop? Because it's always going to be generating a particular response. Sometimes there are subtle variations, other times there are significant deviations. But what that means is that you have to then replace your researcher's hat and put on your content moderation hat. And you're constantly just verifying its outputs to ensure that there is some resemblance, if any, to your data. And so this just becomes very much an open-ended process where you, the researcher, becomes trapped within this. And it's important to point out that the only thing that you can do with the statistical statistical model of language is that you can prompt it. It's reactive. So the outputs are always going to be conditioned based on your inputs to it. And even then, the extent to which you can stay within whatever you want, what aspect you're looking at, that's very questionable. So it's just iterating right through and you're moderating chatbot outputs. Okay, so I think we can pause here and take some questions.
Amin?
Yep, I'm in.
Again, I just sent something in the chat. I'm just thinking that the LLM, okay, it is quite challenging, okay, the research qualitative statu quo. And because you are not yet educated to use it, and when they talk about all this kind of in vivo atlas and things like that, so as we are not really educated on how to use the right prompt because we're talking with machine, it is like programming. So it's not because we are there's a resistance about scholar and concern about it, but because again, okay, we are not yet mastering. And I believe it is like when we're using Excel or calculator before and things like that. People, they are always scared about something new to it is my perception, maybe I'm wrong. So what do you think?
Yeah, I think there's a lot more happening than just the input prompt itself, because you have to remember these models, they operate through very large data centers, right? And these data centers are constantly crunching out particular numbers. And when you think about it, because it's constantly crunching numbers, there are always going to be variations within that. So for example, rounding errors. And then when you start to compound that across all of the whole scale shear of it, it's not always about prompting there. And the thing then is that those errors and hallucinations are always going to be there because of the way in which how the technology is designed, the way in which how it operates. Sometimes it's also dependent on the amount of computing power that has been allocated at that particular time. So there's been instances where people have reported, hey, look, ChatGPT works a lot better early in the morning when it has more access to power and power is cheaper, as opposed to in the evening where it's a lot more expensive, right? But one thing I would say about prompt, when we make that as the the key point. What that does is it redirects undue accountability onto users. It suggests that the reason why you got poor outputs, not results, outputs, it's because you don't know how to prompt. And that's not technically right because there's a lot of issues with these statistical models. So that's my reaction to that.
But example, just one thing, okay? If we're using nowadays like appropriate, okay, application of software, okay, dedicated for research. I'm not talking about ChatGPT, okay? Like consensus or something like that. Maybe they are much trained, you know, to answer this kind of question. So I believe if there's some, because now we use still people using in vivo and different kind of I will not say obsolete software, okay, or things like that, okay. I don't know how to say it, okay. But if I'm sure that if there's much more researcher focusing on developing something in qualitative research for where we can provide the right, it provide of to remove the hallucination and things like that. I believe we will progress.
Maybe, and I think you're right to point that out. What Catherine and we've observed, this is partial. It's definitely not definitive. This is just the current state of the technology. And as we've highlighted, there has been a lot of promise throughout the last 3 years on these different innovations that can get rid of hallucinations, for instance. But we haven't seen it, right? So AI very much operates in the future in that sense. And to return back to your point about having particular training or training a particular model to do a particular thing, well, you have to remember the text that you have when these models are trained on it. It doesn't store that text. That particular paragraph doesn't exist within the model. What it does exist in the model is the statistical relationship between them. And that's what the model uses to generate. That's why these errors and hallucinations have been a very much retracted problems that the big firms are trying to solve. And as I've highlighted, even last week, Google CEO has still said it's still prone to errors.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Aaron? I think you had your hand up.
Yeah, and there's just, maybe everyone's following it in the chat too, but I wonder if you can just talk briefly about data privacy and data, like the challenges of incorporating data into these models, like how it can, even if you anonymize something and put it into ChatGPT, if you don't have an institutional account that's walling off the data, then your data is being incorporated into the model, and then it just the statistical aspect of this is like it's starting to incorporate what you've given it into its responses. And so it's just kind of, you're not maybe ending up finding anything new, or it's the responses are kind of being iteratively biased towards the data that you've already given it or data that other people have given it. Does that make sense? Or can you speak about the data privacy aspect of this or how the data is incorporated?
Yeah, well, what you're basically warning people is that if you're using the sort of the public versions of these, and you're not careful with the settings, or you're not given the option in the settings, this data may be used for further training of the model, and that would violate the confidentiality that you tend to have promised. So I did note that the transcript that I fed into, or all of the data that I fed into these different tools, all of this data was actually publicly available. So you do have to be very, very careful. And that is one of the promises being made by NVivo and Co. So all of these dedicated packages offer as one of their features that your data will remain confidential. So that, yeah, so obviously as qualitative researchers, that's a really big concern. We have to make sure that we're fulfilling ethical requirements, both from our institutions, but also just our responsibility towards the people we study and whose data we use. Honey?
Yes, thank you so much. If I coded and came up with various themes for, let's say, 10 transcripts, can I feed those themes into the model and ask it to check regarding different transcripts? Would that lead to hallucination, or how does it act in that perspective?
Well, the point we're making is that it always hallucinates. That's a feature of the model. It never doesn't hallucinate. It just hallucinates more obviously sometimes, worse sometimes than others, but this is an inherent feature of the model. And one of the things that needs to be said about the sort of statistics here is it's not a deterministic model, it's non-deterministic. And this is a really big difference between GenAI and other forms of AI. So again, we often attribute features to GenAI that just don't hold up to scrutiny because we're thinking that it operates in the way that other forms of machine learning do. But that's just not the case.
Thank you.
Tilda?
Hey, Catherine, how are you? It's Tilda Peterson in Toulouse.
Hi.
Hi. This thing about hallucinations, I do want to bring it up to explore it just a little bit wider, if you don't mind. One of the things that has come to me as a researcher, pretty much since the last time I saw you, was to get myself educated about how to ask questions in such a way that the platform and the product doesn't get a chance to steal anything or do something, I'm just going to say it this way, do something stupid. So I guess when you talk about, prompting and providing the platform, what do you want to say, the product that you're using. I've tried to develop my prompts in such a way that it corrals my data. And I'm also doing it most of the time in their project section so that I know that nobody else can see it. I'm trying to get it to just give me a straight answer. And I don't see this hallucination thing that a lot of people are showing me or telling me about. Can you speak to that to some extent? Do you get what I'm saying?
Well, so what an awful lot of people are doing, and what an awful lot of money is being committed to, is to try to control the behavior of these models. And that is to make sure that they don't provide such nonsense answers. So in the example that I gave you of analyzing one transcript, an oral history transcript that was sort of 25, 30 pages, there's no doubt that within that particular package, that sort of dedicated qualAI, if you like, qualAI package, that there were fewer nonsense answers than if you're using ChatGPT, just the generic version of ChatGPT.
Okay.
So, however, once you start into it, as I said, if you're asking questions of something that's not in the data, you'll quickly get nonsense again. Because remember, it's not actually retrieving your data, it's regenerating it. I had to check to see whether the quotes that it came up with were actual quotes. No, typically they were, but not always. And what I found is that when I did ask a question and it did actually answer it, very often it would provide, for example, 4 factors, but there were actually 8 in the transcript. So it wouldn't deliver everything. So it might give you a couple of examples. And again, you don't know why it's produced these examples and not others. Or it would provide you with a list of instances, and it would provide some of them, but not all of them. So bottom line, you actually have to go and verify everything.
Okay.
And
Very
that's
good.
and this is the point. This is the point of these LLMs. This is the whole point. And this is why companies are pouring billions and trillions into trying to make them reliable. But at the moment, you have to go through and redo the analysis to be sure it's correct. So it's a very, very different prospect than putting it through the traditional manual form of in vivo, where you're in control. You can make sure that you're picking up all of the instances, and you're also quite sure that it's not changing your data, because that's
Right.
what's happening when it's an LLM. It will provide a quote, but this quote may not actually be an exact quote from
Right.
your data, but it will claim to be.
The reason why this is so critical and why I took the time to be here today, because I am trying to finish up my PhD, and I've been to several defenses over the last several months where people are jumping on the bandwagon to do a qualitative paper. And I have heard the names of many platforms over the last couple of months, and they present their data and, they get touch with the magic wand and they become the doctor. But I'm significantly scared because I'm spending a tremendous amount of my own money and my own time to get this PhD, and I really don't need a machine to mess this up. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does make sense.
Yeah, so thank you. I am maybe going to go back to square one, because there's nothing wrong with being traditional in the work that we do.
No.
Thank you.
Aaron?
I wonder if I can suggest too, that's because I'm seeing some like disagreement around like where hallucinations might happen when, like as you just described, Catherine, when you're asking it for specific quotes or specific insights and it's giving you a version of what was said. There's also like across the ecosystem, like lots of different types of models with different types of inferences, or statistical modeling. So I also wonder too, like there's that variability that we as qualitative researchers aren't going to be able to account for. So if you're not experiencing hallucinations the way Catherine's saying, it might just be because the particular thing you're using is working versus like a different model which might have more possibility to hallucinate or reorder words or summarize in a way that you're not asking it to. So I think that might also be a variability thing to consider in this space.
Yeah, there certainly is variability, but the basics of the models don't change. So the basics of the technology that Duc outlined, it doesn't matter whether you're talking about OpenAI or Gemini or one of the other big foundational models. If it's an LLM, as opposed to other forms of AI, so again, there's that distinction, then the underlying technology isn't that different. I agree that you will get variations in output depending on which version you use, but the underlying technology is the same. So, Ona Jomo? No?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hi. Thank you so much for your talk. I really enjoyed it. My question is a kind of pushback, because so far what you've talked about the perils of using generative AI, and my sense is that you may be collapsing all types of qualitative research into a particular type of interpretive research. Now, and I wonder whether you can speak to the fact that we have very many traditions, and I'm thinking about some of the work that has been published in PNAS, for example, where they've been able to show how ChatGPT is able to code large bodies of publicly available text, like tweets, much more reliably than human raters are able to, and they're able to infer themes much more efficiently in that research than whether if they had used human coders. I wonder if you can speak to that distinction between the different traditions in your talk.
Well, I'd be very interesting to see the research that you're referring to, because that's not my reading of the research that's been available so far. For the reasons that we've been saying, that LLMs are not reliable. They're just not reliable. Now, of course, human beings have their failings as well, but the problem that you have with LLMs is that they are a black box. And because you don't get reproducible results, it's very hard to know why the errors have crept in. And in fact, you don't know, because it's a non-deterministic model. You don't know. And the errors will be different next time around. That's the fundamental problem with these models. They're not stable. But we are now on to, okay, where do we see the promise of this moment? So we can keep going. Now, actually, to be honest, we see the potential in this moment as being to actually remind ourselves what qualitative research and qualitative data analysis is supposed to be. So what are we doing when we do data analysis? The problem is that for many years, because qualitative researchers have been told, oh, you know, you have to be systematic, you have to make sure that you're rigorous. You've got quantitative researchers saying, well, we use statistical packages and so we get reliable results, whereas you use yourselves, human beings, you're subjective, and therefore, you know, you're less trustworthy. But of course, the whole point about qualitative research is precisely that. It's that we interpret the data. So what are we doing when we interpret? It's not information processing. Now, of course, you can do a mixed method study and you can do content analysis, and there are various tools available now to do content analysis. You don't have to use LLMs. There's plenty of technology out there that won't mess around with your data. So I'm not saying this is all you have to do, but I'm going to the real heart of qualitative data analysis. And what is it? What are we doing when we analyze the data? When it's not like we're information processing machines. We're not mini computers. That's not what at the heart of qualitative research. That's not what we're trying to do. We're creating new meaning from our data. And so what are we doing? This is the human element. And to be honest, we're in danger of losing sight of this. So when we're interpreting, we are doing all of these things, as you can see on the screen. We're bringing to bear our own experience of the field, our empathy, our lived understanding of our field site, the relationships that we've developed. We bring our reflexivity and our positionality. We bring in our cultural knowledge and our curiosity about other people's lives. We're engaged with the people who we're interacting with and studying. We also have purpose. We're trying to be responsible and responsive. So even if we're not participant observers, we're obviously very committed to our research and the sites that we're getting to know. And all of this is fundamental to understanding what the meaning of our data actually is. So we're losing sight of this when we're talking about feeding our data into models and getting it to code it, whether it's automatically or not. Because when we're analyzing our data, we're also interpreting it. We're creating meaning And this is something that we have to bring to the data as qualitative researchers. So this is crucial, that we actually remind ourselves, what are we doing? And you can see all of this is intensely human. This is what qualitative data analysis is actually about. Now, it can be that, we need to manage our data, sort our data, etc., but that's not analysis. That's data management. Here, we are talking about the interpretation of our data, and that's what qualitative data analysis is all about. Next slide. So interestingly, and some of you may have seen a bit of chatter going on about this, that the authors of reflexive thematic analysis, so Virginia Braun and Victoria Clark, recently released an open letter where they've said that they oppose the use of generative AI for reflexive qualitative research. Some of you, I think, cite their work when you're using their concept of reflexive thematic analysis. And they're making the point that reflexive thematic analysis is not just sorting data into themes. Okay, so that's data management. It's reflexive. So they're putting the emphasis on the R, and that's us as human beings, as qualitative researchers. And that's something that we do. So you can read their position statement for yourselves, but they are trying to put the human back into thematic analysis, which is what we're suggesting is something that we should not be losing sight of. Somebody mentioned the fact that qualitative data analysis comes in many, many shapes and sizes. And I think that in this particular moment, the peril is that we're turning qualitative data analysis into just the one thing, which is sort of labeling data into categories and themes. So this is really a compilation of all sorts of different types of qualitative traditions. So just to talk through this, what we're trying to do when we're analysing our data is, well, obviously we're trying to answer our research question. But to do that, we're situating ourselves in particular traditions. And you can see from this slide that there are many, many, many traditions in qualitative research. And depending on which tradition you're operating in, there will be certain sorts of techniques that you will be used for analysing your data. Now, some of it will involve traditional coding, some of it won't. So depending on which qualitative tradition that you're following, for example, if you're doing phenomenological analysis, a lot of phenomenological researchers will tell you we don't code. That's not the point of our analysis. So that's one thing that you have to think about. Are you going to be coding your data at all? And if so, how are you going to do it? And there are probably many different types of coding that you will use in the course of your analysis. But it all goes back to, what are you trying to do? What sort of research paradigm is driving your research? What sort of research tradition are you operating in? And that, in the end, should inform what it is that you're doing with your data, whether it's coding or it's not. So basically what I'm saying is that we can use this particular moment to clarify to ourselves and to others, what is it that we're actually doing? What are we trying to achieve here? And the danger is that if we don't remind ourselves of this, that we are going to be turning qualitative data analysis into a form, into a form of data management. of just sorting and categorizing our data. And that's not qualitative data analysis. So that's the end of our formal presentation. We're currently doing a study on qualitative researchers and how they're reacting to this particular point in time, how they're reacting to GenAI. If you're interested in the study, please contact us. We'd love to interview you if you have a view, whether it's agreeing with us or not. We'd like to hear from you. So our contact details are there. And if you want to read more, we also have some papers that we've had published recently or are coming out. But certainly we think that, as somebody said right at the start, that we're going through an educational moment. We're going through a learning curve. We're all trying to work out what it is that's possible, what these tools can and can't do, as we should. And we're well placed to do that as a community because, after all, as qualitative researchers, we are trained to ask, what is the nature of a particular thing? What is the nature of this tool? And this really is what propelled our own thinking on this topic, to really understand the nature of what it is that we're being confronted with and what it means for qualitative research. So this is an ongoing conversation, but certainly it needs to be grounded in an understanding of what GenAI is and what it is not, which is what we've been trying to focus on today.
Okay, so we can open now time for Q&A. And we already have a couple of hands raised. But if you have questions, please raise your virtual hand so we can see you and call you. Henry, do you want to go first?
Yeah, just a quick comment about the hallucination that you're completely right with the LLMs, but of course, like most of these tools combine LLMs with software, which is deterministic. So it's very easy for qualitative analysis tools to check that the quotes are actually verbatim in the documents. So there's like different types of risks, and some of them can be managed. That's not true of the general chatbots. But my question would be that, like, how do you see the use of research assistants? So I know a lot of qualitative researchers who use student research assistants to help organize. Maybe that's what you call data management. And for me, the LLM seems ideally suited for that. I mean, it's the same thing that on a different day, it would code things differently. It's not transparent. You don't see the process, how the research assistant works. But what's the kind of the key difference?
Well, I certainly don't get research assistants to code my data. As a qualitative data researcher, that's not something I would do. Because after all, that's the heart of it. If you don't know your data, what are you doing? So you can't. It's something that you can't outsource, I would say. And if somebody else is doing your data analysis for you, I'd put them on as a co-author.
I would say I wouldn't equate a statistical model of language with a human being. I think they're completely two separate things right there, and to make that equivalent, it'll be a false equivalence in my view.
Okay, Joy?
Sorry?
Sorry, Catherine.
Sorry?
Yes. Hi. Is it okay now?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. Hi. Yeah, thank you. In terms of AI thing, when you guys talk about AI as language model and so forth, the way I look at AI is very productive and allow us to be interactive. I'll give you an example. I've been doing research qualitatively in 4 different languages. So the language itself is very useful, and I found it a bit more accurate than any other translation tool or even a live person. That first. And second, also, the research participant themselves, they educate themselves. They use a language which I sometimes don't understand what they're saying, although I'm fluent in all those 4 languages, because these research participants engage in kind of digital platforms, social media, anything like that. They alter the language. Third, about the script. So like Japanese and Chinese and all the stuff, they have, different kind of scripts. They also, some of research participants, they use the most updated, which I did not recognize. And I use the AI, try to help me, what does it really mean, this kind of script? So to me, overall, I'm a bit to push it back that, when I look at AI, it's just a tool, like what Henry have said as well. Perhaps people have other research assistant or something like that, a human being, but this tool allows us, to me, is being more productive and interactive, and also upscaling our research analysis, not to talk about, coding and anything like that. People have discussed this in our qualitative research, what is coding actually really. So just one point. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, we were not talking about, and we said at the start, we were not talking about all of the applications of GenAI, and we weren't talking about all of the other applications of AI. So we weren't discussing its use for transcription, etc. Yeah. So just to reiterate, yeah, we're just talking about qualitative data analysis. So we're not talking about it. Some people like to use it as an ideation tool, etc., etc. We're not commenting on that. We're looking at specifically data analysis. Yeah.
Offer?
Offer? Offer? No? Anyone else?
No, I'm here. I'm here.
Oh, you're here.
Can you hear me now? Yeah. I was just muted. Apologies. Thank you for this very interesting discussion and review of things. It definitely resonates a lot with what I think of how I've seen my little experiments with AI. I'm wondering, and it's something that comes from the fact that what I do mostly is teach research methods for social sciences students and business students. What is your take on working with students on wetting their toes with doing a little bit of descriptive content analysis and thematic analysis with those AI tools, given that they are going out to the world, they will need to learn how to use this for more, I would say, commercial purposes rather than pure research purposes. How do you feel about that?
Well, I mean, we're not against people giving it a go, of course, but what we're suggesting is that people need to be careful. They need to be critical. They need to work out what to use it for and what not to use it for. Just because there's a tool doesn't mean you use it for everything. So just because you have a hammer doesn't mean you use it to open a banana, right? So tools have a purpose, and it's incumbent upon us to work out what this tool is useful for and what it is not useful for. And that's where, again, our training as qualitative researchers come into play, and we need to take a critical view on it. What is it good for and what is it not good for? And that I would certainly encourage students to do that as well. To try it out. And the point is that if you want to do a basic content analysis, NViva can do that now. So I would also encourage everyone to work out what are the other tools. So one of the problems we have at the current moment is everyone's going to GenAI for everything when there are better tools available. And so
Yeah.
one of the
which is
so one of the problems
which is very much what I think.
Yeah. So I think one of the problems is that there's so much hype around this particular tool that various other possibilities for data analysis that we already have to hand, we're not using, yet we could be using.
Yeah, I agree with you. That's my take with the students as well, and I'm trying to convey to them that you first need to know your data, and you first need to know what are the limits of your data, and always be questioning if you want to do stuff with generative AI. And I also try to tell them, try different LLM products and see which of them work better, air quotes, for certain things, because they're not all created equally either. So it's quite the Wild West there.
But with the issues to do with privacy and confidentiality in mind as well.
Yeah. I'm lucky that in our school, even the students have access to internal institutional Copilot. So it's sheltered. Okay, thank you.
Any more questions? Anybody else would like to ask? Okay, Nasreen?
Yes, hi. Actually, it's not a question, it's a comment on the earlier statement you've shared, Catherine, regarding being a qualitative data researcher, but being involved and heavily engaged with your data. My research was actually in Arabic, and I did not use AI even in translation, and that made me really be within my data. If you ask me anything now, I can tell you this participant said that. Whereas working as a research assistant in other projects, we used AI, and I personally felt so disengaged from my data. I always had to go back and forth. But when you're doing it manually, I had to do the translation manually, the coding manually, everything manually. I feel like it's my world now, and I think it's very necessary. Yeah,
Indeed.
I would love to participate in your research, but I was actually viewing the video from YouTube, and there was subtitles, so it was covered. If you can please, or if it's shared in the chat, Abra, please, perhaps, I would love to capture it and participate. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's the thing. We have used technology for a long time as qualitative researchers, and that's one example of transcription software that we've used for a long time. It's getting better and better with AI, which is not Gen AI, by the way. Again, we're back to different forms of AI. There is a question as to whether we should be using it or not. Indeed. So any sort of technology we use has effects. And as qualitative researchers, we need to be aware of that. A tape recorder is something that was introduced a long time ago, and now recording is ubiquitous. Everyone's got used to it. This webinar is being recorded, but of course, sometimes we might want to turn the recording off. So even now with these technologies being things that we take for granted, should we always be using them? Yes, we should be asking that question. And when should we use them? So I totally agree. And there are always pluses and minuses to their use. And one of the problems that we have is that the more and more we take the technology for granted, the less likely it is that we ask these questions.